All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Finning Rebuilds webinar. My name is Adam Brome, and I'm an administrative coordinator with SARM. We're going to start off today's webinar with a brief introduction to the Adobe Connect platform. We will then transition into the main presentation, followed by a Q&A session. This webinar will be recorded, and a copy of the webinar will be sent out to all who attended, and it will also be available on our website following today's webinar. If you're ever experiencing any issues with your audio, first make sure that the speaker icon on the left side of the top toolbar is green, which means it is enabled. If you're still having issues, please refer to the options menus on the top toolbar for additional assistance. Please also note that if you are joining us through your internet browser, Google Chrome tends to work better with Adobe Connect platform. There is also a chat box, which you guys have seen. This is seen by all webinar participants. You can use this to engage with other attendees, bring any technical difficulties to the speaker's attention for troubleshooting, or to provide any other comments and feedback. There is a dedicated question and answer box labeled Submit Questions Here, which is right underneath the chat pod. This is where attendees will submit any questions that they may have regarding the webinar subject matter. Please keep all questions you wish to be answered by the presenters to the Q&A box only and not the chat to ensure that they will not be missed. The Q&A box will be open through today's presentation and the Q&A session. So please, and also please note that attendees cannot see questions that are submitted by fellow participants. Also, there will be a copy of today's presentation available for download in the downloads pod following the presentation during the Q&A. If you're experiencing any technical issues during today's webinar, please notify us in the chat box and we will try our best to troubleshoot. I'm now going to hand it over to our Trading Services Advisor, Amanda Kozak, who will be moderating today's event.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today we have Jesse Ives, who is the Rebuild Product Manager for Finning Canada. He's been with Finning for approximately 5 years in a few different roles within the business, including performance solutions and digital marketing. Today's rebuild session will cover the following topics. Why should you rebuild your machine? Is a rebuild the right answer? Why is repairing before failure so important? What's the difference between certified and dealer rebuilds? What are the warranty coverage options? As well as what's new with rebuilds at Finning. I also have Ainsley Murdoch on the call today. She is the Client Relations Manager with SARM, and she will be facilitating the Q&As at the end of this webinar. Now I'd like to hand it over to Jesse.
Awesome. Thanks. Just a quick mic check. You can hear me okay? Sounds like it. Okay. So I'll kick it off here. My name is Jesse Ives. I am the Rebuild Product Manager with Finning Canada. I also look after a couple of our product lines, including engines and drivetrains as well. So a few different areas of responsibility. Obviously, engine and drivetrain play a pretty big role whenever you're looking to rebuild your machine. So it's natural that those fit together. Okay, so with that said, if you have questions, I know we have the Q&A at the end, but if you have a question that comes up on a slide, I'm not too fussed. If you want to ask it and put it in the chat, I can take a break. Nothing too formal about today. So we'll start off with a pretty simple question that we get asked a lot, and we have a lot of customers at Finning that wait until failure ultimately, and that's what we see. So why should you repair before failure? Well, there's a few different reasons, and we'll go through them in more depth in the coming slides. But basically, it maximizes how many of the parts you can reuse. When you have a major failure with a machine, typically what you see is some of the higher level parts, we call them level 2 and level 3 parts, that are supposed to last, close to the lifetime of the machine or significant hour thresholds of the machine. You see failures with those parts as well. What that does is that drives up the cost and makes things obviously inherently more expensive. And so what we see is failures in general and repairing after failure is at least 2x or 2 times as much. And a lot of the time it can be a lot more. And especially when we look at contingent damage and risk to other parts. We're working on a machine right now that it was in that exact situation, right? It was run to failure, had a major hydraulic contamination, which obviously affected big parts of the machine. Their cost was actually about 3.5 times what it would have been to repair before failure and avoid that risk. The other thing we see is with, the right preventative maintenance and ensuring that you're looking after the machine, watching for warning signals. 90% of failures are preventable is our experience in the area. So it's really key when you're building your maintenance strategy to be looking at that, because failure is expensive. No matter how you look at it, if you're talking about your car, obviously, if you don't do an oil change, you're going to see the punishment on that down the line with how much it costs to repair things rather than get at it before with the preventative maintenance. So as we look at, what are some of those reasons and why are some customers waiting until after failure? And we see four primary things come up. So why fix it if it's not broken? It's a valid question, right? It's something that we often see as well. Everything seems to be working fine. So why would we fix it? Well, ultimately it will fail at some point. And one of the things we can offer guidance on is benchmarks, right? We know on average how long components and machines should last before you see a failure, right? So we can give some of that guidance as to, hey, this is getting close to that danger point, or where you want to start looking at, let's get some repairs done on that machine to make sure that we don't see that critical failure. Oftentimes, as I mentioned, if you repair early, you'll find that it saves money and operating costs down the road, lowers the total cost of ownership almost all the time. Second one there, turnaround time's too long, right? So what we know is obviously every repair, every time you bring it into the shop or do it yourself or whatever that looks like, it takes time, right? And so that turnaround time is too long. I will tell you that not only is repairing after failure more expensive, it's also more time consuming. Not just because of the component that was damaged or the parts that were damaged, but anything else that was contingent damaged, or even just some of the testing to make sure other parts of the machine weren't affected. So that's when we see quite a bit as well. That third one there, we're too busy right now. Production demands require us to keep the machine running. We've got to keep going, whether it's, maybe it's snow clearing season for you, or perhaps it's summer months and it's paving season, or we see it a lot with a lot of production customers, right? Obviously, we live in a climate in Canada where the demands are very high for certain parts of the year, right? And, especially in the summer when we only have so many nice months to work from, it's not a situation where you want to be downing a machine for a significant period of time. But ultimately, same impact here. Failures down the road, they have that negative impact on long-term production. If that failure happens and it's in your busy season, you're dealing with it regardless. And then the final one, we do see this. So operators may not raise red flags. We typically, you get so accustomed to operating in a machine, you might not see those little nuances that something's not right. Maybe the smoke color's a little bit off, you've got a little bit of vibration, those things that operators might not be cued on, so they don't see it. And as a result, they may not communicate those potential issues, keep working away, and then all of a sudden you've got that critical after failure happening. So what I wanted to do was walk through how we look at parts and how we look at those major parts within finning. And the first area is, level 1 parts. And these are meant to be consumable parts, as it were, right? So really designed to wear, they protect their mating parts. They typically are the fastest wearing parts, and we see them not as a reusable item, right? So when we have a machine come into the shop, we're binning these, right? They're used, they've had their effective life done as part of their job, and we're moving on to the next one. And so what you see with, an engine, for example, a lot of the rings, rod, bearings, some of the plates, all of those pieces, some of the valves, and then of course gaskets and seals are pretty common pieces there. When we look at drivetrain, very similar, right? So again, consumable parts, no major surprises there. Bearing seals, gaskets, washers, all parts meant to be consumed within the first life of the machine is how we put it. From there, you get into level 2 parts, which are designed to wear at a slower rate. And this is one of those groupings of parts that you're trying to protect with the right maintenance strategy and the right repair strategy. These parts are unilaterally designed with reusability in mind, right? So it's really important to keep track of these. You're trying to reuse them as much as possible. In most cases with level 2 parts, we are anticipating they are worth at least 2 lives of the machine, right? And when I say 2 lives, I mean you run the machine out, you rebuild it, and then it lasts another lifetime. We do expect a lot of those level 2 parts are designed to last that second life as well. So what do we see there? Pistons, some of the cylinder liners, valves, camshafts, turbo bearings, and seals, right? Not expecting to touch those on the engine side of things. Similarly, on the drivetrain side of things, getting into those bigger, more expensive parts at level 2, so plates, discs, gears, shafts. What we typically see when we do a rebuild is we're looking for signs of wear, any sort of damage to any of those pieces that might indicate there's a bigger problem, and we have to look at some of the level 2 parts as a result. And then finally, we get into the level 3 parts. And our fundamental belief is that these should last the life of the machine. So replacement, typically of these parts, we see it due to catastrophic failure. So that after failure situation, this is where things get expensive ultimately, right? So I talked about that minimum 2 times the cost and oftentimes 3.5 times the cost. This is where you see it, right? If you have to replace those level 3 parts, you're going to see the costs jump up, especially repairing after failure, and it's going to be pretty dramatic, right? So some of the block pieces, the cylinder heads, crankshafts, some of the connecting rods, any critical failures there end up being quite expensive and really amplify the cost. And then similarly on the drivetrain side of things, we see that a lot with, the casings, housings, carriers, some of the hubs and shafts and the planet carriers as well. That's where the costs really get expensive coming through. So what this all builds towards is, okay, let's have a look at where things fail, right? And you can see on that white line, the white line are the level 1 parts, right? And basically what that's telling us is they have a pretty quick wear rate, right? You can see the steeper line there. With the red line there, that's level 2 parts. And typically with the level 2 parts, like I said, we're expecting a lot of them to last the second life of the machine. And then the blue line, just for reference, is the level 3 parts. Again, they wear, but very slowly. They're anticipated to last, the full life of the machine after several rebuilds in most cases. But ultimately, what we see a lot of the time is if the right work isn't done up front on some of those before failure type situations, you get this critical juncture, right? And it turns into this major failure point where basically level 1 and level 2 parts start to see that increased wear. And that's where you can get into some of the catastrophic damage, especially within the powertrain. So when we talk about rebuilds and when we start talking about them, we really we call it a bathtub curve, and pretty intuitive. You can see it there. It looks like a bathtub, right? There's a high risk of failure at 2 points, right? Very early hour. Was everything done as it should be? Is there something in the machine that maybe wasn't quite right? You see that early hour failure, oftentimes covered after the repair, obviously. And then basically you get into this period where there's more of a flattening out. And that's not to say things don't go wrong. They always go wrong. You just see a smoothing of that line. And then we see that accelerated wear, right? And as we get into that, that's when you've basically run through those level 1 parts. You're starting to get into the wear on the level 2 parts, and there's an optimal spot. We're always trying to target as Finning, where we're saying to you, look, it's time to do a rebuild. Those level 2 parts need to be protected. Let's get in. Let's do a rebuild before it becomes more expensive, after a failure or that sort of thing. The one thing I will say is it's hard to hit this exact perfect sweet spot, right? Obviously, from a machine to machine basis, it varies, right? It's not always going to be the exact same time. It depends on condition, depends on things like weather, and sometimes just machines, right? Every machine's a little bit different and has a little bit of nuance associated with it. So when we look at this, and I picked just a more common model, D8T, right? So mid-sized dozer. This is one of our most populous models across Western Canada. And you can see here what this looks like. Basically, this is hours on the bottom, and then this is the dollar value side of things going up there. And basically, each grouping, you can see electrical, preventative, hydraulics, undercarriage, drivetrain, and engine operating as a bit of a chunk. And basically, in any situation where this line starts to rise, and you can see it has precipitous rises as you get towards this, that's when you want to start looking at those decision points. And that's when you want to start saying, hey, maybe it's time to rebuild the machine or rebuild the components, right? And with the D8, what we see is, a lot of the final drives, diffs, those kind of components, those are where we see the opportunity really at the 10,000 hour mark, right? We know we can push the engine past that 10,000 hour mark in a lot of cases, and sometimes it'll run all the way to 18,000 hours, right? But if you're not doing the other I guess, preventative repairs, looking at it that way and making sure that the machine's in optimal running condition, that's where you risk things. And that's why you see this steep curve going up here, right? Costs are baked into that, and you see a chance of it becoming much more expensive if you get into that after failure state. So that breaks down to a little bit of a cost per hour breakdown. And unsurprisingly, right, this is a cost per hour over the life of the machine, same hour threshold at the bottom, same machine groupings on the side. Typically, the decision points operate where things really spike, right? And a lot of that reason why they spike is, yeah, that's a point where we might do the rebuild. It's also the point where we see failures start to occur, right? So you might see something happen at 10,000 hours with some of those components I mentioned, right? Especially if you're not doing the work that's necessary in advance, repairing before failure, making sure you've done some of that work. But really, if you attack this the right way, make sure you've got that right approach to things. You can see this yellow line. This is the cost per hour. And if you do things kind of with that, decision point, that first decision point, second decision point on this machine, you can see it smooth right out. Cost per hour becomes very consistent, right? And this is ultimately what we're trying to drive. We want that total cost of ownership to be really predictable with CAT machines, and we want to make sure that that cost per hour tends to smooth out, right? You're not seeing those big peaks and valleys and troughs as the age of the machine increases. So understanding this on a machine basis, this is a 980, for example, and what you can see is a few different levels of repairs. The first one there, a rebearing reseal effort. Second one is more of a reconditioning, right? So getting into probably some of those level 2 parts, and then that after failure situation. And this is just on a transmission, really, but it goes to show you the risk of not doing things in advance, right? And basically, you can see the costs increase. You do the rebearing reseal, relatively cost effective, about $1.20 per hour. If you wait until you get that, the recondition that's necessary there, it's looking at, around $2.45 an hour is what we're typically seeing. And so you can start to see it increase there. And then if you're waiting all the way until after failure, that's when it becomes a lot more expensive. And frankly, this is a conservative estimate, right? This is factoring in just the transmission, no contingent damage, replacing some of the additional parts as well. And really, when we look at that, the difference between, the cost per hour here, what it really breaks down to, if you wait until after failure, is to make the economics of this work out and have it math out, that machine would need to work 30,000 hours to wait until after failure for it to have that smooth approach that you see in the before failure situations. So no, not a big surprise, but level 2 parts, they begin to deteriorate. That's when you really want to make sure you're getting to the machine so you're not getting to that failure point. So I wanted to give a bit of guidance as to the rebuild process as we shift gears here. And, this is how we look at it from Finning, and we act towards this line as well. So really, we identify a rebuild opportunity, right? And so that's whether you've identified it within your group or maybe we see some things on our end, right? So sometimes that's in the data. If the machine is connected, it might start spitting out some things that are concerning, or you might see it in your oil samples. We also have some things we call PSEs, which are called prioritized service events, which tell us that, hey, this machine is coming up on a major benchmark. It's probably worth a conversation. From there, we'd expect, budgeting, planning discussions. What does this look like? This is a lot easier if you're going at it with a before failure approach, right? Obviously, after failure, it's a 5-alarm fire, and you've got to be working together to find the quickest solution possible. From there, we always look at that, or we try to look at it as a bit of a total cost of ownership, right? So looking at that, cost per hour, what does that break down to? What does that compare to with new? What does that compare to with competitive machines as well, right? Really figuring out where that stands. From there, estimates, budgetary numbers, and we typically like to go into a process where we do an inspection, right? An inspection is really where it allows us to protect against those additionals, right? What are the chances, some of those level 2 and level 3 parts have failed? Is there something that could potentially be wrong there? After we've gone through that inspection process, figure out what timelines could look like. Obviously, if there's financing needs or anything like that, we do address that there. The machine will go into the shop. They'll get a better idea when they get into disassembly of what's going on with the machine. Should have a pretty good idea of how long it'll take at that point, and indication of we'll have it done by X. And then the next major stage gate there is the mid-job review and discussion. So what did we find in the rebuild? Were there any major concerns? Is there anything else that should be done with the machine? Is there anything else outside of scope that should be done with the machine? And then from there, pretty typical, machine and job are finished up, so it gets completed, delivery, and then we invoice as well. So that's what we typically see within a rebuild process in Finning Canada. So I wanted to talk a little bit about certified rebuilds here. And certified rebuilds are a CAT specific item, right? And so what CAT has done in that scenario is said, these are the must-dos you must have to get to a certified state. And so it's essentially repairing machines to like new standards at a percentage of the cost, and that's intended to drive an extra life out of the machine. So the scopes are fairly rigid. We align with them from a finning standpoint. Obviously, Caterpillar defines them and says you must do X, Y, and Z. And within that, they'll say, okay, you must replace this part. You should check this part and see if it needs to be replaced on that part. And that's some of that reuse and salvage. If we can reuse parts, that's what lowers the cost of repair. And obviously, if we're looking at lowering the cost of repair, that's a big piece of, repairing before failure. And so our certified rebuilds with Finney and Caterpillar, they come in 4 major categories. And you can certify everything from major components to the powertrain and hydraulics, all the way up to what we call a CCR. So in the certified components, those are major components, typically engines, transmissions, torques, finals, differentials, and axles are what we call the major components there. A CPT or certified powertrain rebuild is when we're rebuilding the entire powertrain. And then the next category there is CPT plus or CPTH. Oftentimes they go hand in hand. The H just means hydraulics, right? We're repairing hydraulics, but we often look at other things too, right? So do we want to refresh the cab or rebuild the cab and make it nicer inside? GET, undercarriage, some of those other pieces, right? Those are what we see as the plus part of the CPT there. And then finally, CCRs are certified complete rebuilds where the entire machine is rebuilt. The machine receives a brand new serial number, 7,000 parts. It's a comprehensive rebuild. I'll be candid, we don't see a ton of these, right? You're basically rebuilding a machine. It's at 80 to 90% of new, and you're getting almost everything brand new. Obviously, you're not having to add a new frame in. So some of those, core pieces, that's where you're saving on costs. And certified rebuilds become eligible for CAT's equipment protection plan, warranty, as we call it, right? And basically, the terms can range from 1 year, 500 hours, or I think even 6 months, 500 hours, all the way up to 5 years, 10,000 hours. And with Finning, we have a customer service commitment, which 1 year, 4,000 hours as well, really making sure we're protecting the work that we're doing. But when we look at new machines, you'll see the exact same thing. There's certain terms that new machines can get. Typically on the rebuild side of things, we can also match this. So I think there are some new offerings for governmental terms that might be up to 12,000 hours. I've heard a couple situations like that in 7 years. Typically on a rebuild, we can get the exact same term as new. I haven't seen a situation yet where we haven't been able to. And so a CCR, I call it the Mac Daddy of rebuilds, but again, it's all of the critical updates. You get that new serial number. It's going to look like a brand new machine with everything largely replaced or reconditioned within it. Emissions compliance, basically you're going to throw on an EPP on that as well, and it's almost a brand new machine by all accounts. The more common option is, again, those CPTs, CAT certified powertrain rebuilds, or CPT pluses or H's, and then the certified components. So when we look at a powertrain, we're looking, again, those major groupings that you see there. So the axles, the diffs, the engines, the final drive, some of the oscillating groups, radiators, torques, transmissions, and some of the joints. A lot of the things that can be looked at beyond that, right, are the mainframe, right? Is there cracking? Do we need to do some welding to repair some cracks in the frame? Hydraulics, is there anything aesthetically within the interior or exterior that needs to be replaced? Safety and convenience parts, hoses, wiring harnesses, some of that stuff, and then more consumable things, tires, undercarriage, beds, relative specifically to trucks. So what do they look like? Again, these are a couple recent examples, but you can see that's I think a 140H on the left, and then a couple larger dozers. This one here on the right actually just left our shop last week, I think. So you can see it's a pretty fundamental difference between what they start looking like and what they come out looking like, right? It literally does look like a new machine in a lot of these cases, even on the CPT side of things. And so what comes with that, I think most people would be familiar, but CAT machines have that warranty option, especially on rebuilds. We can offer that as well. So it's, 5 years up to 10,000 hours typically. But as I mentioned, we can always look at custom terms to go alongside of that as well. Warrantying these pieces, you can apply that warranty, like I mentioned, to the components. So if you do a certified engine rebuild, for example, or transmission or the final drives or whatever that looks like, powertrains, and then powertrains and hydraulics, right? So those are the tranches that that EPP or equipment protection plan and warranty basically are applicable to. The second category I want to talk about today is dealer rebuilds, right? And dealer rebuilds are a bit different. They're defined by us, right? And so Caterpillar says, here are recommendations for what you should do. Here are recommendations for what you almost must do, but there's a bit of wiggle room otherwise, right? And the belief is that, you know, with those CAT certified scopes, they are regimented. They're meant to be quite stiff in terms of what you replace, right? So an example that's great that we see all the time is, you know, ECMs, right? Do you need to replace the ECM? Maybe not. If it's in perfect condition, you may not need to replace that, right? So making sure that we can shave some costs out of the rebuild within that dealer rebuild. So when you look at some of the recommended replacements within Caterpillar's guidelines on a dealer rebuild scope, it's, you know, bearings, bushings, rods, some of the linings, software, filters, gaskets, a lot of the things you'd expect, right? Seals, O-rings, those consumable level 1 parts are typically what's being, you know, replaced or asked to be replaced in those situations. And then you see the side there on the right, which is discretionary replacements, right? Batteries, clips, the ECM piece, as I mentioned there. Do you need to do anything with the GET? You know, what's the condition? Do we need to replace the glass? Probably not, right? Some of the locks, cotter pins, some of the stuff within the cab. Muffler is a big one, right? A lot of the times mufflers just don't need to be replaced, right? So we can shift past that. Sensors, wiring harnesses are another big one we get asked about a lot. So the big piece with dealer rebuilds is we can define these. We can define the scope and say, this is what you should do, right? And a lot of the time it's going to come in at a lower cost, a much lower cost than we'll see on the certified. And this is where we can see as an entry point where you're looking to unlock an extra life on that machine, maybe not going all the way to a certified state. So typically we would expect it to be, you know, a certified rebuild, a certified powertrain rebuild. We're trying to look around that magic 60% number when we factor in the hydraulics, 60% of new, pardon me. When we're looking at dealer rebuilds, we're looking at anywhere from, you know, 35 to 55% of new. Typically, it varies machine by machine, but that's what we're trying to do. A lot of the time, we're trying to stay below 50% of the cost of new, making sure you're getting an extra life out of that machine, maybe not seeing the full cost of a CPT as well. One of the exciting things that we see this year is we are able to apply that same equipment protection plan that I mentioned before. So EPP with Caterpillar, they are now offering it on dealer rebuilds. This is really, really cool. Brand new as of January 1st. So we are a pilot dealer for this program within Caterpillar's network. We're testing this out. We have a number of quotes out in the business. And basically what it does is it gives you that peace of mind. The terms aren't quite as aggressive in terms of length or time as they are on the rebuild side or the new side, but they're getting really good too. And so what we're able to offer is up to a maximum of 3 or 5,000 hour, which has all of the exact same warranty options. The terms for these ones, the major components are still eligible, but it's only 2 in this case. And so it's engines or transmissions and torque converters. And the cool thing about this is you can still get that warranty if you're doing the removal and install yourself, right? So if we're just doing the work on the engine and the transmission or one or the other, you can still get warranty on those pieces. And then powertrain and hydraulics, and then powertrain as well. So if you're doing work, you know, factored into all of those major components there at a lower cost than the certified option, there is a warranty term available for those as well. Take a bit of a breath. So what models can be rebuilt? This gets asked a lot, right? And should all models be rebuilt? And this is straight from CAT, right? So you can see just about all of the major product groupings are there. And it's a pretty wide range, right? So the track type tractors or the dozers, it's everything from a D5 all the way to a D11, the jumbo stuff, right? And similarly, wheel loaders from a 914 to a 994, getting into that big stuff. And what we typically say to that is, not all models can be rebuilt, and it really depends, right? And it depends on what you're trying to do, what you're trying to get out of the machine. And we typically have these breakpoints in the business as to whether a certain size of machine will make sense to rebuild. That being said, that does not always mean that it doesn't make sense. So I'll give an example. A 938, which is a smallish wheel loader. Basically, we would typically say, yeah, it's at that size of class that it probably makes sense to buy new instead. But we've had 3 situations now this year where customers have asked us to rebuild that. We've done it, around that 60% of new cost, and they've been thrilled with the results, right? It really depends on what you're trying to achieve out of it, but we see rebuilds across all of these equipment types here. We see them a lot on the big stuff. Obviously, Western Canada, we have a lot of mining and resource industries customers. So it's not surprising that some of the big off-highway trucks and some of the big dozers and scrapers and wheel loaders are seeing rebuilds there. But we see them across the middle and even smaller size classes as well. So it really depends, and it's almost worth a custom look at your equipment as to, okay, what condition is the equipment in today? Could a rebuild be done effectively? What does that look like for the cost of ownership? And does it make sense, right? Because it won't make sense in every single situation. It's too hard to answer that question. But in my experience, in a lot of cases, a rebuild does. So when we go through these details, a lot of what we talk about is the planning and budgeting piece of rebuild specifically. And so we have some tools on our side to make this a little bit easier. What you're seeing on the screen there today is a look at a CPT. And so what we've laid out here is we've actually custom built this scope, and we've gone through it. And this is again a 980 example, but we've gone through it, and those are all the things that will be included within a CPT. And we're giving an idea of what that cost is. Now, what I'll say is that's just an average, right? That's really an average on what you'd see in terms of, pretty standard condition machine, hasn't been run into the ground, hasn't been babied, right? It's that middle ground, right? And we have a lot of this guidance so we can say, hey, if you're looking to rebuild a 980H or a 966 smaller wheel loader, or a 140 grader, right? We'll have an idea of how much it can cost, how much a CPT should typically be, what that range is, and then how much a dealer rebuild could be as well, right? And so that basically allows us to plan a little bit with you as to what you should expect within costs before you get to that formal quoting stage. It's more of an idea. And you can see here, the CPT in this situation is coming in at less than 50% of new, and that CPTH, or with hydraulics, is coming in right around 60% of new in that case, right? So for a 980, we expect it to be a little over $600,000 and on average, and you can see that both of those numbers are in line with what we try to achieve from a rebuild perspective, trying to save some money so that you're getting the most out of that machine over the course of its life. Go forward to the next one. We do this on a component level as well, right? And proactive component replacement is a key part of that and this life cycle approach. We don't think it makes sense in every single situation to do the certified powertrain or even do the powertrain, right? It might make sense to just handpick some components and say, what are the things that we want to extend the life on? And so what I really wanted to highlight on this slide, this is a 14H. I think when we pulled this at the time, there wasn't a new option. I think there may be now. But basically, we look at a couple different major categories, right? So rebearing and reseal, again, that's those level 1 parts meant to really prolong the life of the machine as much as possible. Recondition has more of those level 2 parts coming into the fray. Reman or exchange. So both of those are remanufactured options, exchanges, the finning version of that essentially. And what you can see is if we treat new as 100%, this is where we typically see these numbers coming out, right? So if you're looking at the rebearing reseal of a component, we expect it to be 25% or less of the cost of new. When we look at reconditioning a component, right, getting into some of those level 2 parts, typically what we want to see there, we want to see that 40 to 60% number. Again, it might vary a little bit up and down on those numbers and have a little bit of variance there. And then when we look at reman and exchange, that's 65 to 80% of new is typically what we see there. And so, really, when we look at planning and budgeting these things out, especially for certified options, these would all be certified, right? So these are certified scopes we're looking at, especially for the engine. So this would fall into that certified component rebuild approach, right? And we have an idea of where those ranges fall. What I will say is, if you're looking at those dealer rebuilds, say a dealer rebuild on this 14H for an engine, you'll actually see those numbers come down almost across the board. And again, you can apply that warranty to the machines as well. Okay, so what does this look like? And last year was, I think, an interesting year for just about everybody through 2020. We saw, at the start of the year, we were doing our average number of rebuilds, and then the world stopped to an extent, right? And we saw that at Finning too. Everybody was nervous about everything, right? And that's from work all the way through to everything that was going on around us. And as we saw the year go on, things returned back to normal. But I wanted to give some guidance as to what we typically see and what we've seen in the territory in terms of rebuilds. What I've left out of this slide is some of that bigger equipment that doesn't really apply so much to the call today. The big dozers, the D10s, 11s, some of the trucks, the 777s and above, right? Getting into that more mining focused equipment. We've rebuilt a ton of that, right? And we typically do every single year. This is more smaller, mid-sized equipment and some of the stuff we've rebuilt recently. So the dozer side of things, we rebuilt about 12 D6s through D8s. Basically, there were some D7s in there as well. So we've rebuilt several of those. When we look at motor graders, those have become a really popular item, especially lately, to rebuild. So I think we did 8 in 2020, and we've already got a number of them in the shop this year. I'll tell you right now, when we look at it from a dealer rebuild perspective, motor graders are one of the chief options, right? That's a machine that you can get in, you can do a lot of those components, and you can do it at a fraction of the cost. It becomes a really appealing option to new if you're budget conscious and you're looking at how you can get the most out of it. So you can see there a number of 14Hs and Ms, a couple 16s, 140, 160. I can tell you right now, I think we have 2 more 140s in the shop right now and 2 more 14s, if I'm not mistaken. Then when we look at wheel loaders, as I mentioned, a couple 938s, 1 more has come into the shop as of January. We did see 3 950s, a couple 966s, some 972s, different ones there. And then above that, a number of 980s, 982s, 988s as well. So bigger wheel loaders. When we look at some of the waste compactors, right? So typically landfilled machines, a couple 826s and 836s last year, a number of quotes and work going on for 816s and below, 815, 816s in territory right now. I expect we'll see more of those this year than we did last year, actually. And then some tracked loaders as well, right? So you can see a couple 963 Cs and Ds, and then 3 973 Ds as well. Also, often a waste compactor type machine used in landfills and that sort of application. So we do see a number of those as well. And so I'll end on this and leave some time for questions here at the end, but here are some of the notable programs we have in market. One thing I will say is we're always willing to build custom programs. It depends on a machine and it depends on what's important to you. And I say that not to diffuse and try to make it a conversation to have, but if you're interested in warranty, how do we design a program for you that makes the most sense, right? Gives you the maximum term of warranty. If you're looking for the lowest cost repair, great. How do we figure out what that dealer rebuild can look like? Make sure you have the maximum warranty term on there. Basically, we can customize these to look however we want to make them look to make the rebuild as effective as possible on your end. So, some of the offers that CAT specifically has in market that we then supplement from there. And a lot of the times we'll say, yeah, we'll throw additional warranty on there, or we'll give X, Y, and Z to make it a compelling offer for the rebuild. You can see some of the machines that they've identified this year as target machines. So 140Hs and Ms, 960s, 966s, so Gs, Hs, Ks, and Ms as well. 972s, again, Gs, H, Ks, and Ms. A couple dozer models as well. So there's D6Rs and Ts, D8Rs and Ts, and then 980Gs, Hs, Ks, and Ms. What I can say is probably not as applicable to this call. There are some additional programs coming for off-highway trucks, some of the larger wheel loaders, and excitingly, some programs for excavators as well. So everything kind of from that 330 range all the way up to the jumbo stuff, which is 390s. And what these programs typically entail is you get a warranty term, so all the way up to 3 years, 6,000 hours. And again, as I mentioned, that can be extended out too if you're doing the rebuild. Typically, we'll throw in our customer value agreements as well, which are preventative maintenance parts kits. Sometimes we can make that a labor solution too, if that's something you're looking at. And then these typically have a performance, safety, and comfort option with them as well. It can be anything from a seat upgrade to seatbelt reminder to new LED lights. In some cases, there's a variety of different options with the programs that we have available today. And so really the thing I want to leave you with is, rebuilds, they I think typically were looked at as this very complex, you have to fit an X, Y, and Z bucket. And as we look to the future, what we're trying to do is, we've seen a lot of tumult in Western Canada, right? How do we customize these options, right? How do we make them make sense for specific machines, specific customers, specific applications, right? We don't want to say this is the only machine we can rebuild within this group, or this is the only way we can do it. We want to make sure there's options all the way through, whether that's on the rebuild front from a dealer rebuild warranty or component basis, all the way through to the certified options, or if that's warranty alongside of those, right? Really making sure we have solutions that fit at every level. So with that, I'll leave it there and leave some time for questions. So I've included my information. I think this will be sent out with the recording. If you ever have any questions with regards to programs or what this looks like or anything we went over today, always happy to answer questions as well. Email and phone number there if needed. And I think otherwise I'll pass back to Ainsley to fill out some final details.
Great. Well, thank you, Jesse, for that comprehensive overview. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. I don't see any questions yet, but before we get into Q&As, I did want to thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedule to participate in this webinar. And I just wanted to talk about briefly about my role with SARM as well. So I'm the client relations manager with SARM Trading Services, and my role with SARM is to assist members in all their procurement requirements. So just remember, I'm here to work for you guys, and I can work with your team to help source out equipment you might be looking for, help you obtain membership pricing, and maximize supplier discounts, and as well as connect with your local sales rep. So just as a heads up, feel free to reach out to me at any time with any questions or to schedule a call or meeting with your team so we can review your unique procurement requirements, and I can outline how to best take advantage of the program. All right, so now let's take a look at some questions that have come through, and we'll do our best to answer them. Don't think there's any questions at this time. I'll start with one, Jesse, for you. Do you guys offer like free assessments? Like, do you, I hear it's hitting that sweet spot of is it 10,000 hours? Or like, do you go to a member's shop and kind of look at their equipment, and like, is there ways that you guys gauge is based on when they're starting to repair certain things at that level 1 point where you suggest a rebuild, or what do you do to work directly with members to help them with that process?
It's a great question, and I think there's a couple different things. So we actually have an inspection program in market right now, which can help, and that involves us sending out a certified technician to look over the equipment and say, hey, these are the X, Y, and Z things that you should do, or that we found, or sometimes we don't find anything, right? And we say, yeah, machine looks great, keep running it, right? And so I think on that level, there's that piece. Obviously, our sales force is always there too. Those sales reps are highly trained, and they can come out at any point and have a look at these machines as well, and do some of that low-level inspection on their end as well. And then finally, I think we always look at the data too, right? We're trying to get better and better with the data as more of that becomes available, right? So as we see things or notice things, whether it, like I mentioned, with oil samples, with our benchmarks, with some of those alerts that are coming through, that's another area where we can start to flag, hey, you're at that 10,000 hour mark, might be worth having a conversation, or might be worth us just coming out and having a look to make sure everything's flowing as it should be.
Okay. Great. I have one question
there as well.
Yeah. Does Finning provide financing for the rebuilds?
Absolutely. Yeah, we do. And so Cat Financial is the group that basically provides the financing. We work very closely with them. What I will say is any governmental customer is typically given preferred status within that, but when it comes to financing, we have very aggressive terms. I think they're actually going to get even more aggressive this year. But what you can see is, at the point of sale for new, we're typically matching that on a rebuild. So you can see the exact same financing offers, all the way from 0%, depending on the term. A 12-month term right now is 0%. And we can even go out to 24 months, 0% in some cases too, up to, I think, 48 months type thing is it's 2.99% financing, all the way through that gamut of options.
Okay. And did you talk about like membership pricing at all as it relates to the SARM? Is there anything kind of special discounts? I guess it's all different based on where they're at in the rebuild process, but
Yeah, it would vary. I mean, what I would say on that is it's worth having the conversation to say, what does this look like for me, right? I think it can
Mhm.
be a bit of a broad spectrum answer today to that one. But I would say, if you're looking at what it is, we're here to help, right? We're here to have that conversation. We're here to provide an option that fits within the budget that you have as well, right? We want to make, like I said, we want to make sure we have those different tiers of options, and we want to make ourselves as accessible to the market as we can.
Okay. Yeah, I don't see any other member questions. One question I had too is just what is like the history of rebuilds? I feel like this is a fairly new concept to some members. Like for how many
Mhm.
years have you been doing this and is it getting more popular?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question, right? And CAT's statement is CAT equipment is built to be rebuilt, right? And one of the things in Western Canada, especially that we're challenged with, is we see a lot of machines leave territory. And there's this, I don't want to say consumption approach, but it's you use the equipment and then you send it to auction. A lot of the cases with some of our customers, they send it to auction and they buy new every single time, right? And basically in those situations, we're losing a lot of the value, right? When you have something that's built to be rebuilt, that's not what a lot of our competitors can't do. And so the first rebuild, I think, in finning was done in 1985. So though it's becoming more of a common option now, it's something that we're always looking to do, right? It's meant to be a different access point. It's meant to save, 20, 30, 40% on the cost of new as well. So really not necessarily a new option. It's definitely a focal point. Obviously, across the industry, we're seeing constrained budgets right now. And what's a perfect answer for that? Well, save, that 40% on the cost and do a rebuild instead. Get that extra life out of the machine.
Great. Yeah, so someone just asked, I would like to share a copy of this recording to council. Is it possible to get a copy of the slides from today? Definitely, I think we're sharing some information, the recording as well as the slides that Jesse has went through. We'll definitely send that to all members. And yeah, even if you have people that weren't available today, we are sharing the recording to anybody who's interested. So we'll definitely be sharing that and you can provide, yeah, go through that with them. Another question that came through is, can you discuss how the rebuild would affect the trade in value of the machine, please?
Yeah, it's a great question, Sherry. I think it always depends, right? But when you're rebuilding a machine, basically we're getting into it and we're doing the work on the machine, right? So what you see is the machine's going to be worth X when you get to that decision point, and there might be things wrong with it, right? When you get it into that next life, typically what we see is the after effect sale of it is higher, right? So when you rebuild the machine versus a machine that's been run into the ground, you're seeing it be higher. We've touched it more recently, and so the trade-in value of it erodes a little bit less. And I think that's one of the biggest value adds of CAT equipment as well. Typically, we see higher trade-in values, right? And it's because there's that recognition in the market that a machine's at 10, 15, 20,000 hours. It doesn't mean that's the end of life for the machine. And with some of our competitors, it does, right? They're not necessarily designed to be rebuilt the same as CAT equipment. But when you get to those thresholds, the market is almost saying, okay, this machine could be rebuilt, That's why its trade-in is worth more. And that's not limited to the second life of the machine. That's also third life of the machine, right? We just had a conversation with a customer that they just ran a machine out to 58,000 hours, which is incredible, right? When you think about it, they're obviously using it quite a bit every single year, but that's the value of CAT, right? It's that rebuildability. It's not just one life. It's not two lives. It can be three. It can be four, depending on the machine as well.
Great. Yeah, I don't know if there's any other questions. I did want to mention too Diane was asking about sharing this information to council, and I just wanted to say too, we're able to do one-on-one conversations with each RM as needed. Like Jesse, we can do this presentation again to other members on a customized basis even, and this is one of many conversations. So I think we can definitely like tailor it to your budget and things like that. Like, so there's but ways that we can just definitely do this presentation again rather than just sharing the recording. If council or someone from your team missed this presentation and are interested. So
Yeah, bang on. I'll make myself available, and if you want specific areas of focus as well within the presentation, happy to curate it to that. And maybe you say, yeah, we don't really care about the 980s, we care about the 140s, right? Or we have a 966, or let's tailor it. Let's make sure we're talking about the right equipment and the right things.
And that's true too, Jesse. Like you do customize it based on their budget. Like I mean, within certain add-ons and things that they're looking for.
Yeah, you betcha. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We're always looking at that.
Okay. Great. I don't think there's any other questions, so we can wrap it up if there's no other questions for today. But yeah, thank you so much, Jesse. That was very informative, and I think members learned a lot today. And like I said, this is just one of a future conversations, so feel free to share this recording with your team or reach out to Jesse or myself if you have any other questions. But otherwise, if there's no other questions for today, we'll just close it off and like share the copy of the recording after, so you have that information to follow. So yeah, if there's nothing else, just thanks again for your time to participate in this webinar today, and take care and stay safe. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for having me.